Hi, everybody, and welcome to the HCD VidCast. Today we'll be talking about our approach of MaxImplicit. So that is a made-up word that we did to combine two methodologies. So we are happy to talk to you about it today. Excitingly, we're also joined by our frequent, at this point, guest, Allison. My name is Michelle Niedziela. I am VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research. As always, I'm joined by the lovely Kathryn Ambroze.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathryn Ambroze, Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with the Research and Innovation team here at HCD. And like Michelle had mentioned, we're thrilled to welcome back Allison. Allison, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, glad to be back. This is Allison Gakowski and I am the Director of Global Research at HCD.
Yay!
And I feel like now this is now a trio, it's not a duo.
Yeah, you're not a guest anymore. You're just one of us. So a little bit of background for those of you that are new, joining us for the first time. HCD is a research house. We do consumer research, looking at how consumers perceive, evaluate, and respond to stimuli. That could be products, or it could be communications, all sorts of things, anything that a consumer might experience, even in-store experiences. We use a combination of neuroscience, psychology, and traditional methodologies to look at that human experience. We do it from early stages of exploration all the way through validation, anything from product development all the way through marketing. This work can be done globally. We have labs where we can wire people up when appropriate. We've traveled all the world with that, but we can also do work online, which can be done anywhere as well. We've been having these conversations, Kathryn and I, and often joined by Allison, and we love talking about topics that are relevant to market research and consumer neuroscience, topics that are relevant for today. Today's topic in particular is pretty interesting because it's really getting into how we combine some of these traditional and non-traditional tools. So welcome back those of you that are new, and welcome back to those of you that have joined us before, and welcome to those of you that are new. So what are we talking about today?
So it really seems like it's breaking down exactly how to understand the consumer, and more importantly, how the product experience is embedded in how the consumer perceives the product experience.
Because it really is a connection that you're making, right? So brands connect with consumers. Everything within a product is a connection to the consumer's life. They're using it, they're watching it, they're entertained by it, whatever it might be, right?
Exactly. And I think that it's really important that we have what we have listed here, that if something's consistent, you want that experience to be consistent across all the platforms, so that way there is that brand harmony within the product experience.
Right, so it makes sense. So it's not like the commercial is telling you that the product is one thing and the product isn't doing something totally different, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think that often when you have that consistency, it helps people to not only recall the brand and recall the product experience, but it's a way for them to really connect with the target demographic, whoever that may be. So again,
Right.
It's really just that theme of connecting.
So if the product was different every time, you wouldn't really have a good idea of what the product is.
Exactly.
You have expectations about what that product is, and you need those perceptions then of the product experience to match those expectations.
So it's not disappointing, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that another big component that we want to consider too is being able to understand, when you're looking at the target demographic, that you're really able to ensure that you understand what's motivating that purchase, and so that way you can strategize exactly how to recreate the motivation to continue that purchase. So it's not just a one-time thing, it becomes embedded in the routine of a buying behavior.
Sure. And so it also needs to be relevant, right? So it needs to make sense for the consumer, because if it isn't relevant to their lives, why would they use it?
Exactly. So how would we do this? Let's dive in a little bit.
Okay, so we're talking about this being kind of like a marriage, right? So it's a marriage between the more traditional tools with the sort of newer non-traditional tools. MaxDiff is a traditional tool, right? And implicit testing is a non-traditional tool. It comes from psychology. And we'll dive into those in just a moment. And we also have, white papers and other vidcasts where we dive into these in particular. But what's our reasoning in bringing these things together? We actually see a synergistic effect. And what I mean by synergistic is that it's stronger than either alone, right? So you have MaxDiff is a really powerful tool. Implicit testing is a really powerful tool. You bring those two things together and you have this multi-phase research approach that combines the power of both and gets real consumer insights, right?
I like to say that it adds context.
Mm-hmm.
The MaxDiff adds the context to the implicit results and vice versa.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. So let's look at exactly what each component is so we can understand better why they work so well together. So MaxDiff, right? So MaxDiff is basically forced choice, right?
Right. So it's this idea of the respondent is trying to decide how to rank, for this example, various dessert options. So that way they can see what is the best in this group of options and then what is the worst. And essentially that's an opinion because everybody, has different preferences. So by forcing this preference, you're able to have the participant make trade-offs so that way there is some type of prioritization.
And the reason behind doing it this way, this sort of forced choice thing, that it's almost like a gamified version of ranking something, right? Now, if you had like a whole list of like 30 or 40 items that you had to rank, that becomes really difficult and tedious and boring for the participant, right? But when they have it come up as just a couple of options, either 2 or 3 or 5, where they have to choose the most and the least, and they're the different options keep coming up that they keep choosing amongst, they go through that enough and it comes up with an algorithm that basically spits out the whole ranking of, say, 30 different items.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only just preference too, right? MaxDiff can be done with, let's say, what are the important attributes when you're considering purchasing a product? So is price more important than quality, for example?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a really fun tool because it's a little bit different than doing, a fairly boring survey, right? Where you're just, maybe ranking like, again, 30 items. It's a bit much. So it makes it a little gamified and it gives you a lot of bang for your buck in that, right? But it is a traditional tool. It's just a little more advanced. Now, if we move on to implicit testing, you can see what that is. So implicit testing is a tool from psychology where they were looking at biases. So again, you can always refer back to either the white papers you can find on our website or to the vidcast that we did on implicit. But basically it is looking at reaction time. So the faster you respond to something, it's the stronger association you have. So if you think something is really tasty, if you click the screen, touch the screen when the word tasty comes up for pies, then that means that you actually have a really strong connection with pies being particularly tasty, maybe more so than ice cream, right? So if you respond faster to the pie being tasty, then that means that you have a stronger association there. And the cool thing by it being response time means that it's not something that the participant is consciously saying, I am ranking this as being more, right? So in the previous, looking at MaxDiff, they're consciously making a decision that pie is more tasty than ice cream, or they prefer it more over ice cream. But here, they don't know that they're responding quicker. And so this implicit idea is this non-conscious approach that you can have them making choices and giving you information about that strength without actually having to ask them, right?
Right. And that makes sense that these would pair nicely together because you're getting that really implicit but also explicit understanding of where the consumer's priorities as well as their, associations lie. So it seems like it's a very, a strong fit.
So one thing that Allison and I like to sort of describe the MaxImplicit combination as being is that the MaxDiff is giving you like the needs, right? So they need pies, right? Or they need, pastries more than pies, whatever it might be. And the implicit is giving you the gap. So, the pie is tasty, but the pastry isn't highly tasty, right? So if pastries wants to sort of move into pie space, then they may need to increase their tasty.
That makes sense. And then also you can see based on the implicit testing, what's being well done and what's being, conveyed well to the consumer. And then also, like you were sharing, what needs the improvements. So it's like a way to understand both the priorities as well as the assumptions and what they're really looking for.
So here's to dive into that a bit more. So when we're talking about brands, for example, you may want to know how your brand and product really fit together, right? Allison?
Yeah, absolutely. So when maybe you're thinking about, repositioning your communication or reformulating a product or a product line extension, this is something that's really important to understand that dynamic of, I almost like to say, who are we and where do we need to be? So the implicit test tells us who we are as a brand, right? So our brand right now currently isn't highly associated with any of the where do we need to be attributes, right? From the MaxDiff, that's telling us in this specific case what those most important drivers were for, in this instance, a nutritional beverage. So if the number one top need is that it's something that's healthy, we're not currently meeting that need as a brand and the perception of the brand. And that's really an opportunity for us to strengthen that, whether it be through communication, through packaging, through product. It gives us these opportunities for us to better meet the expectations and the needs of the consumer.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, jinx. So Allison, I do have a question for you because I feel like this is something that would come up a lot if somebody was interested in employing MaxImplicit. For this research to be validated, is there a particular sample size you'd suggest for maybe like a target segment or something like that?
Sure. So it always depends. Right. If we have a very homogeneous type of sample, obviously a little bit lower, but our best practices is with even the implicit test, we don't want to go lower than 75. If it's very general population, we'll even raise that 75 a little bit higher. And obviously MaxDiff is quantitative, so it works really nicely. It's not something where, we're having to bump up the sample so high for something that's more qualitative just in order to make this marriage fit together. They're both need quantitative types of samples.
And then just to kind of follow up on that, how long does it take how much does the MaxImplicit add to the survey length? Because I know fatigue is often something that people worry about if it does get too complicated and too long.
Oh, absolutely. So the MaxDiff, you can really have up to, we like to cap it at about 30 different attributes or statements in the MaxDiff. And going through all the randomizations and choices that you have to make, does take quite a bit of time. I wouldn't say it is extremely exhaustive, but the implicit test can be, because it does require a lot of attention and fast action. So a respondent will get fatigued more quickly with the implicit. So we need to really limit that to a degree.
We break up the experience, right?
Right.
To give that sort of mental break. But I would also say that the MaxDiff often replaces other pieces of the traditional survey that was done. And so, it's not just adding on to a current survey. It's often coming in there and replacing pieces of it as well.
Oh, I see. So it does kind of balance itself out in terms of timing.
I think so.
Yeah.
So let's jump into a case study to sort of explain, why it's important, how it's really useful on identifying those need gaps and really uncovering opportunities that, clients can use.
Yeah, so this was a fun project that we had where our client had a much beloved cereal brand, and it had a decent amount of sugar. It was absolutely delicious. They were required to reduce the amount of sugar. And we know when we do that, the taste changed, the visual aspect of it changes. So we wanted to make sure that what we were creating and the product that was going to be replacing the original was going to be a really nice fit for the brand. And using the MaxImplicit approach, we were really able to do that, right? Because not only do we want to make sure that it's a good fit with the brand, but we also want to make sure that there's any type of improvement or need gaps that are in the market. Maybe our new product or a product renovation is going to be able to fulfill that need. And this is kind of in line with that alienation discussion that we had a couple episodes ago, right? Making sure that we're not displacing our loyal consumers, but still filling any types of needs and potentially growing our product.
Especially when taking away something that's like so important to the product. So, and you're talking about sweet cereal, if it's not sweet, and you're expecting sweet, like that's heartbreaking, right?
It's very
right. Right. And that's something that we were really, really struggling with. So, to jump ahead a little bit, when we look at who our brand is with the implicit test, our brand was classic. It was comforting. It was indulgent. It was, your midnight snack as much as it was your breakfast cereal. So it was really this nostalgic type of product in these consumer minds. And when we look at the max diff, because we're trying to even better our product further, so when we're thinking about those top drivers for purchase, the number one thing that these consumers were looking for was something that was wholesome. And currently in the market, when we looked at our brand versus the top competitor, neither of us were strongly associated or highly associated with something that was wholesome. So this was something that we had the opportunity to move, right? We had the opportunity to fulfill this gap that currently our brand and our competitors weren't meeting. So going into the product development part and testing the prototypes, what we wanted to do was make sure we're staying true to the brand, but also, can we fulfill this unmet need of wholesome? And when we did actually do our prototype testing, there was 3 different products, A, B, and C. We started to see the different personalities of these different products, because in a traditional hedonics, scale of liking, they weren't differentiated. They were all 8s, 9s, none of them statistically differentiated from each other, but we know that they were very different. And how can we better understand what's not only going to be a good fit for us as a brand, but for the consumer, fulfilling some needs, some unmet needs? We were able to use the implicit to do that. So what we actually found was prototype B not only matched our brand with classic and comforting, but it also was highly associated with wholesome. So not only were we able to really stay pretty true to our brand, but we were able to fulfill this unmet need that the consumers were looking for.
I think what's important to think about is that in the implicit part, it's often very difficult for consumers to really convey that, right? To really say that something is more wholesome, especially when things are so similar, right? Or maybe that things are different on levels of classic. So, I think that, being able to draw out those differences on especially on prototypes is really key, right? Because it's difficult to do.
Yeah, and that's what we see a lot, is that differentiation from prototypes when solely relying on traditional hedonics types of tests. We're often left needing more. We're needing more information to make a really informed decision. And what we found is, whether it be physiological measures or something as simple as psychological implicit testing, we're able to better get at that differentiation.
It's
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah, and I just want to clarify something. Can we just describe for a second what hedonics actually is? Because I don't think we've ever addressed that yet.
Oh yeah, it's a very sensory and consumer type word for consumer research. Hedonics basically means that you like something, right?
Okay.
So the traditional ways of measuring that are 7-point scales or 9-point scales, whatever it might be. And the person would taste products A, B, and C and rank them from 0 to 7, each one. And so what ends up happening a lot is that there isn't a lot of differentiation. Other parts of hedonics can also ask, like the sweetness level, is it just about right? So that's another scale question that's often in hedonics. Or maybe, would you purchase? That can also be part of a hedonic survey. But all those things are based on very traditional Likert scales. And often there isn't differentiation. So if you're like, how much do I like these? And they're all pretty much, similar, then you end up with everything being, a 6.2 or,
Right,
at least
right.
not statistically different, right?
That makes so much sense. And especially when someone's unsure of how they can convey the way that they're feeling to a number, that can be very challenging. So
right. And that's also just a really small aspect of the consumer's experience. So just asking someone liking may not be enough. And that's what you can kind of see on the scorecard. If we'd only measured hedonics, then A and B aren't different, right? And actually you're probably not different from C either statistically. And so being able to add in these other numbers that strengthen or further those differentiations really makes it obvious that B is a winner, right? So
Absolutely.
that really draws it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's just, you're getting more information about that overall experience and what the consumer is, really what they're experiencing and what they're trying to convey.
And that's another part about getting more information. Not only can you then separate things out better, but let's say that none are meeting your action criteria, meaning that none are quite good enough to move forward with. Well, if you have this additional information, you can actually see spaces that you can improve on, right? So maybe it is that B is doing really good, with all these words, but maybe you want to make it more indulgent. Maybe indulgent is something that you need to improve on, right? Or maybe there's something that's performing really well hedonically for A, and you can learn something from B to really improve A, right?
Right, absolutely. No, that makes total sense. So I think this could be very valuable, especially if it's not, too strenuous on the participant to help. It only makes sense to include things that will help differentiate and give more information.
Absolutely. So we think it's a great tool. We call it MaxImplicit, that combination of MaxDiff and Implicit. We think they marry really well together to provide the most actionable results. We've been doing this a lot over the years, right, Allison?
It's my favorite. I play favorites and it is my favorite. I just think it's so simple, but it gives you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Allison, and everybody who's tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this. If you do, please click like, because we would love to have your likes, our validation for what we're doing. Follow us on YouTube, join us on LinkedIn, tweet with us as you can see at the bottom. Visit our blog to get more information. Feel free to reach out by email anytime. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you join us again next time.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.